Hi, I'm Dave Bundy, editor of the Journal Star. Welcome to our Journal Star editorial board endorsement interview with Helen Raikes, who is candidate for the State Board of Education in District 5. Helen, thank you so much for being with us today. Before we let you do all of the talking, we'll let Kent talk for a minute and say who he is and why his picture is on here too.
Sure.
Kent?
Hi, I'm Kent Walgamot. I write about arts and entertainment. I've been on the editorial board for over a decade. We've done this before, I think, in a previous race.
That's correct.
All right. Well, Helen, thank you again for being with us. This first question is a way for you to sort of introduce yourself and outline a little bit more about your thoughts on the office. But why do you want to serve on the State Board of Education, and what experiences and attributes qualify you for service?
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to meet with you two today and with your editorial board more broadly when they view the recording. I am, as you know, from rural Ashland. I lived in Lincoln for 40 years with my late husband, Senator Ron Raikes. And so I've lived in Ashland since the time of his death, which was 13 years ago now. My reasons for running for the state board are multiple. The first reason begins with Ron, and that is he died prematurely, in my opinion, and I made a vow to finish our work together. Ron and I had worked together when he was in the legislature. We were thought partners, particularly around early childhood education. At that time, we were successful working as a team in many ways in expanding early childhood services in the state of Nebraska. And many of them are now well in place in our many school systems. We also were successful in passing the legislation that led to the Sixpence program, which is a program for children 0 to 3, also based in school settings. And to do that too, we had to pass a constitutional amendment, and that was successful. So during those years, we were thought partners, especially around early childhood education. He did a lot of other things that I was probably less involved in, but I was convinced that the work wasn't done, and he was too, even though he was term limited out. So that was my number one reason. My second reason is that we have 3 children. 2 of them live in Nebraska. I have 6 grandchildren. 5 of them live in Nebraska. And I want to see the kind of education that our children received in Lincoln Public Schools at the time. I want the same thing for our grandchildren. And I have talked to so many grandparents in the state of Nebraska who have similar kinds of feelings. They feel like and recognize the strength of our education system traditionally, and have concerns about it today because the environment is more stirred today. And I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those things. So it's my grandchildren that I'm thinking about. And actually, I have grandchildren in both public and parochial schools. I'm a strong advocate for public schools, but I'm also sensitive to issues in parochial schools and for parents who are homeschooling their children. The purview of the board is all the children in the state of Nebraska. And so I really take that seriously. I have visited with superintendents, school board members, and parents, teachers in some 20 districts in the state. But I've also included in that, to the extent that they're happy to do this, parochial schools, and try to understand some of the issues they have for them. So it's all the children, but beginning with that lens of my grandchildren. My next reason is that I'm a lifelong educator. And sometimes the press begins with, the wife of Senator Ron Raikes. But the truth is, I've been in education my entire life. And so when people came to me and pressed me to consider this, it felt like a good fit. I've been an educator in terms of research. I've done a lot of policy work with U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. I led the early Head Start national evaluation, working with 17 universities and towns all over the country. And that evaluation won the national award for a federal award for evaluations 2 years running. So we did a bang-up job with our collaboration. And I've been in this business. And then I came to UNL and was appointed as a Willa Cather Professor of Child, Youth, and Family Studies. And in the university too, I've had a lot of experience in the College of Education working with and thinking about the certification processes in order to bring our students into the teaching pipeline, which I think will come up with priorities. So that's another reason it felt like a good fit. And finally, the other reason I'm in it is because I so strongly believe in our democracy. We need opposition, we need at least 2 candidates, and we need to be having the discourse. And particularly in Nebraska, where our nonpartisan discourse has been rich traditionally, it feels to me like that is an important contribution that I can make to the overall picture, win or lose. It's an important process. So those are my reasons and a little bit about background. I can say more if you want.
No, we should probably keep moving along here.
Yeah.
So next question for you. The words local control get brought up a lot in terms of
Right.
education. You're running for the State Board of Education.
Correct.
Has the state board interacted appropriately with local districts? Should that change? How do you see what do you see as the state board's role in local education?
There are really a lot of things that we could say to that question. And so I'll try to keep it succinct. I think Nebraska does have a good system where the local boards who are representative of their community, because anybody can run for school board and they're open for public comment and so forth. So they have a lot of local input. I mean, that's where the heavy decision-making is carried out. And I just really do personally support that, the curriculum, the hiring, the procedures. And again, in visiting many schools too, I see the different schools do this in different ways. And that is exactly the way it should be happening. I think it's their prerogative. The state board has a different role, and that role is to provide a framework, to set the standards, but they don't tell the schools what to teach, but they provide parameters for teaching through the standards. And I think that's a pretty good system. But today, there's a lot of stir in our political environment today. And so local control is meaning different things to different people at this time. Okay, so let's take it from the standpoint of parent input. Parents do have opportunities for inputs, and that's not the same thing as what the local school board does, but it's a part of the process. They have opportunities to run for office, to show up at school board meetings, and they also have opportunities to review the curriculum, because these kinds of things are transparent in all good schools in Nebraska. And to my mind, what I've seen is that people really do have that opportunity. So when it comes to things like the controversial areas like books and critical race theory, and even whether a sex education curriculum is adopted, because these are hot buttons today, those are the kinds of decisions that are made at the local level. And in my opinion, and not just my opinion, but my understanding of the roles, the state board isn't driving those kinds of things. Let's see, to reframe or pull back there, some people have declared that the state overreaches its boundaries and the locals don't have the control that they're seeking. And so I've been checking that out with school board members that I know in the district, and I'm not hearing that. I'm not hearing that that is an issue. I think there's been a lot of confusion lately in some of the standard setting, particularly in one area, but the overreach I don't think is as real as it seems, and I'm probably not saying that in the very best of ways, but I think it's become a part of the political discussion with some real issues and some maybe not as real. And so, that becomes a part of the argument. And here's another example about what the locals have control over. They also have control over the budget, because for most of our schools, they are not equalized. And so it's local people through their property taxes who are fundamentally supporting the school. And so that's an important issue as well. Okay, we are, of course, number 49 in the nation when it comes to state support for our public schools. So just keep that fact in mind. So there's a lot of pressure at the local level financially on taxpayers, property taxpayers particularly. Some people have said, as an example, that we should not accept federal funds. Now that's not about the state board per se, except for the pass-through and interpretation of the laws and the statutes. But where do the federal funds that come into the state go? They go to the local level primarily for Title I and for special education. And so even people like Luann Lenahan, who you might think could be aligned with this position, are saying we should not give up our federal funds. So, that discussion about trade-offs as it pertains to federal, state, and local, that's an ongoing tension, I think, and requires a lot of talk. And so a lot of communication, real communication. But where I put my eggs is in the basket of local control for most of what happens in our schools.
All right. So you've touched on this a bit already, but clearly there are issues that are very divisive related to education, and there are people who are very vocal. How do you bring them together? How do you listen to those who might disagree with? How do you incorporate their concerns in your decision making?
Right. Actually, very strongly. I think we are at a really important kind of crossroads when it comes to education in both the state, but in the country as well. And one of the things that I believe I'm good at, and my colleagues say this is true too, is that listening, and finding the places where we can agree and getting a through line. And for example, in the area of critical race theory, which probably comes up on almost every visit I make to a local community in one way or another, something that I'm sure of is, and I've had this verified as I talk to people who are, who want to talk about this more and have concerns, is that Nebraskans typically have been extremely supportive of education, and they're extremely supportive of their children. Nebraskans love their children, and they love their schools for the most part too, and that aligns with what we know from polls and so forth too. So I have proposed that Nebraskans want every child in the classroom to feel a sense of community and to be welcome. And that Nebraskans would never say, because of their love for children, that they want any child to be excluded or bullied, or something like that. So based on race, they would not want to see a minority child, being excluded in the classroom or discriminated against. And they all say, yes, 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 I agree with you. But then I also point out, I said that nobody either wants to see a majority child, in this case, in our state, a white child, feel that they personally are responsible for slavery, for example, which I think is the fear of some people, that this burden is going to be placed on the children, and other people have fears on the other side of it all. But I think this is a common understanding, and people agree with me on that. So I think we have to find those points of understanding. I'm an independent, I'm a moderate, and I'm a communicator, or I think of myself in that way. And so it's looking for those points, not denying people's voices. I absolutely think it's a good thing that people are paying more attention to education right now. That is welcomed. And so we need a way to hear that, and a way to hear it in such a way that it's productive for us. So I propose things like after every board meeting, having a Zoom meeting where we recap and say, this is what happened, and, where are you on this? And if we need to break it down into administrators and parents and teachers on different calls, because we have so many and there's so much to process, we would do that. But this is definitely a time for us to be reaching out and having clear and consistent communication with our constituents.
All right, thanks, Helen. So I realize that we've just gotten done talking about how this needs to be a matter of local control, but in your mind, to what extent do you think students need to be exposed to transgender, to LGBTQIA plus, racial, cultural, and other equity-related issues?
Well, I've made the statement that I think our schools need to be welcoming places for all students. And I think that applies to this issue. And exposed to, I think that right now is up to local school districts how they want to handle that. I've talked to people on school boards who have said, in our smaller districts, it has come up. They have had a student who has had a transgender kind of an issue and a question, and they handle it in very individualized ways. But I think they've also felt confident that them determining the sensitivity and how they want to deal with that has worked well for them, and it's in the locals' hands right now.
Okay, so we've sort of touched on the big headlines that are getting a lot of attention. What beyond some of these, these issues that are creating the stir, as you said, what are things that people ought to be paying attention to?
Right. Okay. And maybe I can move that towards my priorities for being on the board. Hopefully,
Sure.
I mean, that's my interpretation of what they ought to be paying attention to. I have originally been saying that the first attention should be paid to the teacher, staff, para, bus driver, kitchen worker shortages. We have workforce shortages, of course, throughout our state, but it's acute in the area of education. And so, a high priority, and it's already in motion, but I would definitely contribute to this, is to think about the pool. And the pool, we have to think about the teacher pool beginning in junior high and high school. And then where I have experience is on preparing people for certification. We need to examine our certifications. We don't need to lower our high standards, but we need to definitely examine the ways that people can get to those and provide alternative routes. And then there are things to examine that are very specific, like the praxis. And then it's the whole recruitment, which in some ways I've referred to from the pipeline, but also the retention and the kind of consultation we provide people, support when they go into the field, and then support for them as they progress on through. I mean, just marketing of teaching. It's we're at a quasi-crisis situation. What the superintendents tell me is that in many cases, they used to have, for example, 75 applicants for an elementary school position. Now it might be 5, but they're still able to find a teacher they have confidence in who meets their criteria. So it's just that the selection is more narrow, and we can see, I mean, there are plenty of statistics that show you that the number of students in teachers' colleges are going down and so forth. And that is not a Nebraska phenomenon alone, that belongs to the country. So that's number one. But very close as a number one now is to really focus on the communication within the board and across between the board and our constituents, as I've already referred to, and with the public too. And so, and I think there needs to be more attention with the new board and now a new commissioner with really solidifying the shared vision of the role of the board, going back to, what's in the Constitution and, what has evolved since then. And then also the strategic plan, which is a forward-looking document, and, ensuring that everybody understands what the board does and doesn't do. Oh, and then after that, my priorities are mental behavioral health services. We are woefully understaffed in that area around the state, whether they're in schools or if they're there as part of the resource. And then, of course, early childhood access is going to be an interest of mine. One of the tenets that I lead out with is that we have been a strong education state. And sometimes people are saying, education in Nebraska has gone to the dogs, so to speak, it's not working at all. That is not true. I mean, there are challenges without a doubt, but we are still number 9 by US News and World Report's assessment. And so, we've been strong and we are strong and we want to stay strong. But as part of US News's index, they include where we stand on access to early childhood as just one of the indicators. And we're number 32 on that one. And so what that is saying is that we do have early childhood as part of our school structure, and many 4-year-olds are in the TEOSA formula and so forth, but our access isn't as broad and wide as it might be to support what early childhood programs can do, both for communities and for school readiness, and particularly for vulnerable children. And then my next area is going to be around it's like ready for school or ready for career or college. And on that one, which is also in the index from US News, we're number 23. So, so what do we do? And I think here we would tip the balance to look at technical and career education. Schools are doing some really nice things in those areas. I mean, I visited, the greenhouse in Seward and the welding shop and so forth, but, trying to align those with community colleges and, to the extent possible, certifications, and getting greater funding for that. The funding is not particularly the school board's purview, but it could be a platform. So, that ready for career or college, that's another one of my priorities. And then finally, because I have a background in research, I just really want us to pay close attention to the burden of testing and the pressure that puts on schools, and which we're starting to do well now. It just isn't quite, in the public eye yet, how that data are timely, fed back in a timely sort of way, so that schools and teachers can really use it for their classroom instruction, so putting the emphasis more on that end and less on the pressure end of things. So that's my 6 priorities.
All right, I have one final question, but before that, I'm going to see if Kent has anything.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that one of the issues in Nebraska education that isn't talked about much is the differentiation between sort of the education in the small rural communities and Lincoln and Omaha.
Right.
And that I assume is a real challenge for the state board to be able to deal with.
Right. And we need strong voices in every sector, to bring that into the pool of thinking here too. But it is true. I guess I have the advantage of having lived both in Lincoln and now I'm in Ashland, and so seeing it from the purview of the local communities. I think local communities, many of them are struggling because they're not equalized, and so the money is an issue. And the concern of the taxpayers as our property taxes keep going up, and I sure hear that a lot when I go out, is a challenge. And so, keeping that, the eye on the prize in the local communities is an issue. There are just areas that haven't had as much attention in local communities. Like I said, career and technical education. It's had attention, but there might be ways to connect it more to certification so people could go right to work in the community, and so in some areas that's going to work. In other areas, more training is needed, of course. not everybody wants to talk about access to AP classes for college-bound kids, but we certainly see a lot more of that in our urban areas than in our rural areas. So, that's a concern too. So the resources are, sometimes strapped. It's not always the case. It depends on the property base in many cases, and what they're able to support, but in other cases, the resources in rural schools are quite small without equalization or reduced equalization. And that is a big challenge. But then there are challenges in urban areas too, because we're still, as I understand, from a presentation from, it's like Baker is his name, is from the University of Miami, who spoke this last week in Lincoln, is that even still Omaha is regarded as under-resourced for the population that it has, so there are challenges on both ends. The other thing I want to say about rural communities that I'm pretty passionate about is that 2019, so 3 years ago, I was a keynote speaker for Nebraska Thriving Communities Conference, which mostly attracts more rural communities. And this is an annual conference put on by the Buffett Institute out of Omaha, but the conference is in Kearney, and people from all over the state are coming to this. And when I was keynote, it really inspired me to think about the connections between thriving children and thriving parents and thriving communities. And what I have to say is that if our rural schools are threatened, that is the heart of many of our rural communities. That's what brings everyone together. So, there's a lot at stake at keeping our rural schools strong, and many of them really are. I'm convinced of that.
All right, well, I've just got one last question for you, and we have just enough time to handle it. So what did we not ask you that you wish we had?
Well, what I didn't share with you is my perception that with my moderate problem-solving approach and background and so forth, that I'm the best candidate for this, and because my approach is broad, and I understand there are so many details and laws and regulations, that are not set by the board, but need to be transmitted through the board. So my focus is broad. So, and that's opposed to a more narrow focus on a few issues, which I think sometimes are not even in the purview of the board. So I contend I'm the best qualified because of my background, that I'm the best for children. Again, because of my background, I understand child development and developmental appropriateness is an issue, and that the pre-K, the career access, and thinking about our schools being welcoming of all children makes me the best for that. I think I'm the best for schools because I believe in our legacy. I'm a strong Nebraska citizen. I know we know how to do good education. I think I'm the best for local control because I don't want to see things coming from the state board, like you can't read these books, that kind of these unnecessary prohibitions. I think it's not in our bailiwick. I'm the best for teachers. The Mind Polluters film, it denigrates teachers. And I think at this critical time for people coming into the labor force, we need to be celebrating our great teachers in Nebraska. And I'm going to focus on the pool, as I said. I think I'm the best for parents because early childhood, parents are always involved. That is, you always recognize that parents are the most fundamental people in their children's lives, and they should be asking about the curriculum. It's great right now that there's attention. They should be going to their school board meetings. They should be talking to their teachers. But it's every parent, we want to encourage to do it. And what we know from polls is like 75% of parents are saying, let's just focus on their education. Let's focus on learning recovery after COVID. Let's focus on the mental health issues we have. They're not interested in some of these political sidebars, but some are. So it's important to pay attention to. And then finally, I would say I'm the best for communities because I so recognize that divisiveness around education is not good for our communities. It's the opposite of good for our communities. And I really believe in the connection of schools to our communities and to thriving. And schools have partnerships with people in communities, and, you know, career education, early childhood supplement that relationship with the communities. So those are my final words. How are we doing? 2 minutes over.
All right, we're good.
Okay.
Well, Helen,
Okay. I hope you endorse me.
all right. Well, thank you very much for your time. We wish you the best with your campaign, and we appreciate the time you spent with us this morning answering questions. So thanks so much.
I appreciate your role too.
Thank you, Helen.
Okay, that's an important part of the discourse, an extremely important part. As an old journalism major, I can say that, you know. Okay, take good care.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye.
Too.